Hi, how are you? During this week, we are celebrating in Seville the Feria de Abril, April's Fair, a whole week where people enjoy drinking, eating, talking, and dancing. Through history, music was always protagonist of the feria and, of course, flamenco, but not always sevillanas and rumbas were danced. Do you want to know which was the most common flamenco palos danced in the ferias in the 19th century? Do you want to listen to what music was danced at that time? Don't miss this episode.
Sounds that once were listened. Sounds that once were enjoyed. Sounds that once were danced. Sounds relegated to oblivion. And yet, there is still something we can do for them. Let us summon them. Let us summon them.
Welcome to the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco. My name is José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, and I invite you to enroll in this journey through the sounds, stories, spaces, and people that were part of the 19th century flamenco.
Hello, how are you? I hope you are very well. First, thank you for the reception this podcast and its Spanish version are having. In the category of music history podcasts in iTunes, we have reached some days the number 1 in Spain, number 5 in Australia, number 4 in Switzerland, number 69 in the USA, 18 in the Netherlands, 27 in UK, and number 10 in Mexico, for example. I send you a million thanks. For us to keep growing, it is essential that you subscribe to this podcast, click like to the episodes, and share them in your social media. We celebrate the Feria de Abril, translated as April Fair, in Seville this week. For those not from Seville, the Feria is an ephemeral city set up annually in a large esplanade of almost 500,000 square meters. To give you an idea, it is about 50 stadiums. There, the so-called casetas, consisting of warehouses with an iron structure covered by colored tarpaulins, are built. There are more than 1,000. There is also space for attractions, or as we call in Seville, the cacharritos. The feria has been celebrated in Seville since 1847 and originally consisted of an animal fair, a meeting point between sellers and buyers of bulls, cows, horses, donkeys, sheep, etc. My own grandfather, José Hernández, used to go from Castilblanco de los Arroyos to Seville to buy and sell animals during the feria. From the first years of this event, the recreational activities were an important element of the feria in addition to the purely commercial activities. In 1848, only 1 year after the feria began, the livestock merchants asked the authorities to control these non-commercial activities because, according to them, the civilians with their singing and dancing made it difficult to do business. Therefore, we see how these songs and dances are present from the very beginning of the feria. And what would be the music listened to in those first ferias? Well, in different periods in the feria, it was sung what was more fashionable at the time. To understand this, we can have a look what is currently heard at the feria. In addition to the indispensable sevillanas and rumbas, we can hear also salsa, bachata, or reggaeton, for example. In the 19th century, the same thing happened. Fortunately, we have several chronicles describing what music was played at the feria. In 1881, in an article by Benito Masiprat, we found this curious description of the feria that year. The casillas cannot be described or painted. Something about them escapes to the brush and resists to the pen, the movement. Placed side by side and arranged in general uniformly, they are, by one of those originalities typical of Andalusian, neutral and independent fields. Each feudal lord in these castles of boards took his favorite hobbies, without caring a damn about the hobbies of his neighbor. It is, therefore, very frequent that the end of Norma is cut off by the beginning of a petenera from the next casilla, and that the gypsy seguidillas of Silverio or the juguetes of Santa Maria died in bloom because of I Puritani or Rigoletto. As we can see, each caseta or casilla, as the casetas were called at that time, had music. We can see how flamenco songs such as peteneras, seguidillas, or juguetes are combined with arias from the most popular operas at that time. The combination of music as diverse as academic music and flamenco is also referred in another article from 1884 as follows. All that glitters is not gold, and it is true that the casillas adorned with flowers and mirrors and occupied by pianos where the melodies of Schubert and the graceful Andalusian peteneras resound can never give the characteristic of solemnity that so enchants the curious tourist. Let's listen to some peteneras that became fashionable in the early 1880s. It is entitled Viva Jerez, composed by Isidoro Hernández. In 1882, the Uruguayan Héctor Florencio Varela, who at that time was the Paraguayan ambassador in Spain, wrote the article entitled My Hours in Seville, narrating his first stay in Seville, during which he was able to enjoy the feria, where he describes the music he listened to. Despite torrential rain, there was a feria, and there was dancing and peteneras and seguidillas and malagueñas and that funny set of entertainments, with its special cachet, which with exquisite grace has been able to idealize the Andalusian character, because this must also be noted. The feria in Seville is entirely different in everything from the first of the other towns in Europe. We see how he mentions the peteneras, malagueñas and the sevillanas, also known as seguidillas. Those of you who follow the podcast will know that these two flamenco songs were the most popular in 1882. We are listening to a malagueña that Varela could hear, and this malagueña is precisely titled Un recuerdo de la Feria de Sevilla, popurrí malagueño. Although a guitar arrangement of this piece has recently been wrongly attributed to Julián Arcas, the author of this malagueña is Mariano Taberner. In 1893, another chronicle of that feria describes what was going on in the casillas or casetas. Here with guitar, there with piano, or to the sound of a barrel organ, there are dancing and singing peteneras or seguidillas. Only the casilla of the Círculo de Labradores stands out of this, where rigodones and valses are danced. And the truth, and it seems that they stand out and not a little, the quadrille of the seguidillas. Once again, you can see how sevillanas and peteneras are the protagonists of the soundtrack of the ferias at the end of the 19th century. We have already listened to some peteneras, and now we will hear some sevillanas of that time for piano. This is probably how the inside of a caseta sounded at the end of the 19th century. I love this sevillana so much. In this narration of 1910, we still see how these two palos are the protagonists of the feria, joined by the tango, so popular at the early 20th century. The tambourines sounded, the castanets clattered and are played by beautiful hands. The couples dance the classic seguidillas of rhythmic beats. Listening to the sentimental peteneras that touch the soul, around its plate, the glasses ram from hand to hand, the cantaor gets ready, releases a hipio, the guitarist tune, and the tango begins, which marks the contours, which inflames, produce vertigo and anxiety, and ends in dizzying turns of madness, of delightful sensation, of tender sentimentality. We are listening to a tango of that time, whose score is included in the Tratado de Bailes by José Otero in 1912. The music was composed by Luis Sopeña. As you can see, besides the guitar and other stringed instruments used to accompany the songs and dances, tambourines, barrel organs, castanets, and the piano was an instrument also present at the casetas, where besides Andalusian styles, operistic and zarzuela arias, opera and zarzuela arias were played. In this episode, I hope you have been transported for a few minutes to those 19th century ferias where there was no lack of excitement and live music. I hope that if you go to the feria and listen to music other than sevillanas, rumbas or fandangos, you will remember that this has always happened and will continue to happen. As you can see, popular music is very dynamic and constantly changing. The important thing is to enjoy the music, dance to it, and have a good time. If you liked this episode, you can subscribe to the podcast on the leading platforms and share it with your contacts. If you are in Seville, I wish you a very good feria. Be careful with the manzanilla and rebujito, and I will be waiting for you here in 2 weeks.